Families with a member with a disability experience a lot of stress.
Hi, I'm Brian, and this is Paul.
And we are professors of practical theology, and we also have family members who have special needs. Brian, you had a story to tell us about that experience of stress.
Yeah, in fact, it's a kind of unresolved pain for me that I'm hoping you can help me to sort through.
I'll do my best.
When our son Adam, who's now 16, was 8 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia, which was obviously a shock, but it also became a kind of grueling treatment process, which includes intensive chemo that lasts for a period of months, and he has to stay in the hospital. So during that period, we fell into a pattern of my wife, Stephanie, doing the days, and I would do the nights. And the reason why he needed someone to be with him all the time is that to do chemo, you have to have what's called a long line, which goes down into a vein so that the chemo can be put into a main vein, because it will burn peripheral veins. And if those are pulled out, it obviously is a pretty messy situation. And there wasn't enough nursing staff to sit with him, so one of us had to be with him all the time, which, as you can imagine, was a pretty stressful and grueling experience. Well, on top of that, chemo also lowers one's immune system, and he got a chest infection, which meant that he had to have a cannula to have oxygen in his nose, and that had to be sort of watched to make sure it didn't get pulled out. So there was a regimen of coming to check to see if it was still in and if his oxygen levels were good. And that lasted for a week or so, and he was starting to get better, so they were starting to bring the oxygen down. And I, of course, had been having interrupted nights because of the sort of 3-hourly checks for a week now, and I was getting pretty tired as well. And so I discussed with the doctor, perhaps if the oxygen was looking okay at the midnight check, we could skip the 4 a.m., turn on the lights, wake us both up tomorrow morning. And the doctor agreed because he seemed to be improving. Well, 4 a.m. rolls around and the lights go on and a nurse comes in, and I was not pleased, to put it mildly. And we had more than a blunt discussion, and I lost my temper, and we had to go outside, and I was really upset because the deal that I'd made with the doctor was just being ignored, I felt. And she, of course, it was just a miscommunication. She somehow hadn't heard that the decision had been made to skip the 4 a.m. And so I ended up, Adam was woken up too, so I got him dressed and I went and got in the car and I took him home, and I showed up before dawn at my house. And when my wife, who's also a nurse, Stephanie, answered the door, she was, of course, happy to see us, but she was horrified. And when she found out that I'd yelled at a nurse, she was angry, because as a nurse she understands that patients and parents who yell at nurses are really very unpleasant. So I still feel very bad about that story.
You should.
And trust me, I do. But I don't know how to think about it, and I don't know how to avoid it if I was in that position again. So I think you might, could you offer me any wisdom on what I might do if I was in such a situation again?
Well, first of all, just to clarify, you were sleeping there all night. So you were in Adam's room and you were sleeping.
We were in the same bed.
You were in the same bed and you were sleeping, so you were getting woken up every night by these rounds, and also sleeping with another person in a small bed, and the hospital noises and the lights in the hall. Yeah. So you weren't getting very, very good sleep, were you?
No, that, to put it mildly.
So you're not getting very good sleep to begin with, and I imagine we all know, as we get more and more tired, I get more and more crotchety. So, I mean, first thing I'd say is you're a saint, because I would have done a lot worse. Did Adam have the tubes in his nose and everything when you left?
He left his oxygen behind. So.
But he had a tube?
He had a sort of tube hanging out of him, and he was totally bald from chemo. So it was not also
It looks like a kidnapping.
It was, yeah. He had gauze around his arm.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so you can imagine.
So you're walking out with a little boy with a tube coming out of him, and wow, I'm glad you didn't get arrested. Okay, anyways, let's talk about stress for a minute. I did a bunch of research on stress a while ago, and we can break stress into subcategories. So we have the idea of conflict and the idea of frustration and then pressure. So stress, we can break it into categories of conflict, frustration, and pressure. So conflict occurs when you have some desires that are incompatible. So it's not necessarily interpersonal conflict, not you and the nurse, but inside you had incompatible desires, and that creates stress in us. And so from what I'm hearing, that you had an internal conflict that you couldn't resolve. You wanted rest, you had a desire for rest, you had a need and a desire for rest. Mm-hmm. However, at the same time, you had a need and a desire to care for Adam, and no one else was going to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you had two essential but conflicting needs and desires. Mm. So you were living with stress for 2 weeks that would not let up, because I imagine throughout the day as you were working and everything, you were probably walking around like a zombie because of all those nights.
Exactly.
So you had conflict, and then you had frustration. So you'd worked out a deal with the doctors. It was all set up, and you're going, get at least 5 hours or 6 hours on less interrupted sleep. And then in walks the nurse at 4 a.m. And you know, when we're overtired and when we've worked a deal out, it's like saying to a man in the desert, I'm going to give you a glass of water at the next stop, and somebody didn't get the memo, so the water isn't there. I mean, so you had that frustration of having your desire for rest blocked, and you'd worked it all out. Unexpected, worked it all out, boom. And then this is all based on kind of, if you view that as a house shaking in an earthquake, this is all based on the underlying issue, which is pressure. And pressure occurs when our schedules, our time, and our energy and effort is outside of our control. When other people control what we have to do and when we have to do it. So often people will talk about pressure at work because they have unrealistic deadlines from their bosses and things like that. So pressure is also part of daily life. Well, you were living in pressure. Mm. You had this, all of this was outside of your control. It wasn't in your control when Adam was going to get sick, how long he was going to be sick. So all of these things are outside of your control. So when I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about us as parents generally, and our watchers as parents, we have conflict. We have incompatible desires. We need to get our work done. We want to have a social life, and we need rest. And so those are our desires. We also want to care for our family member who has a disability. We're caregivers who want to care for our family members. We love them. We're not heartless. Those are incompatible desires. We have to leave work. We have to reduce our rest. We have to cancel. So we have that, first of all, we have that conflict and incompatible desires. We can't give up our whole lives to care for our loved one. At the same time, we can't just go on with our lives and ignore our loved one. So there's a conflict right there. Well, we have frustration especially, and I know this feeling, and I'm sure you've all experienced it over and over, and Brian, you've experienced it, where we get everything scheduled so I can go out and exercise and get some of my work done, and there's someone helping me with my child, and a caregiver, or at school they have something. Well, all of a sudden they have to cancel a half a school day, and that's last minute, and you just hear about it Tuesday and it's going to happen Wednesday. Or somebody calls in and says, I'm sick, I can't come in to help you today.
Or in Scotland, it snows. I know that never happens in Southern California.
No, but I'm from Toronto,
Oh.
so snow days, although we'll go through anything, snow's no big deal.
The special schools are always the first ones to close because
Ah.
they're picking up people in wheelchairs,
Right.
and so
a snow day.
A few flakes could happen any time in the winter.
So a snow day. So once that happens, boom, I've got to call into work. I've got to say I'm going to be 4 hours late, or I have to leave early. That gym appointment that I was going to do that would help me deal with my stress, I got to cancel. My friends were going to play racquetball, I got to cancel it. And then maybe I was going to go out with a friend for a movie or something with somebody. Well, I have to cancel that too. So that's the frustration. It happens, we're getting blocked. Our desires are, and they're reasonable desires. It's not unreasonable desires. And then the third part is the pressure. And our schedules are outside of our control. The schools have a schedule. The IEP meetings have a schedule. The teachers' meetings have a schedule. The different service providers, well, we only come during these hours. This is the kind of service we can provide. Our person we're sending you cannot drive your child anywhere. Or our person we are sending you cannot leave the house. Or you have to have only a certain kind of person because they have to be qualified to give medicine. However, then they can't do these other things. So all of our scheduling is outside of our control. It just feels like constantly outside of our control. So that's the underlying sense of constant pressure.
That's really helpful. It explains the component parts of my frustration in my admittedly extreme situation, but in a way that does explain the frustrations that happen in much more mundane and regular occurrences in life as a parent of a special needs child.
Or with the father or mother living with us.
Sure.
Or it's any person that we are caring for, and it could be short-term or long-term.
Well, let me tell you, we talk with one another about how the church can step in and support people in such circumstances. And for us, it was amazing that it was really the students. And as a theologian, we have Christians studying theology from all around the world in Aberdeen. And the students spontaneously did two things that were really amazing and encouraging. And the first thing is that they organized a schedule to bring dinners, casseroles. So students would just turn up each evening. It wouldn't have had to have been every evening, but they chose to do every evening. If it was, just had been a couple of nights, it would save us having to go to the grocery store and keep up with all the infrastructure of cooking. And they did that for a period of months, and it was just amazing to have them coming to the door and having a brief conversation and saying, we know what you guys are going through and we want to take a little bit off your plate. And then on occasion, some of them would come and they would sit with Adam so that one of the parents didn't have to be there.
That's fantastic. They were showing such concern.
And they, I think, in certain respects it was enjoyable, but in many respects they just thought, we want to be with you in this. And that really was a lifesaver for us.
So, first of all, that's fantastic, and don't you love people like that? And don't you want to be a person like that? Even we can all do some of that.
Yes.
And it feels so good to do some of that,
Yeah.
especially when you see. But let's go back to our categories, just out of interest. Conflict, two incompatible desires. Well, when the students brought you meals, you were still a professor, and you still had to get your work done. But now the time to create the meals, the time to go and do the shopping, that time could be used for a desire and a need to prepare for classes or work a little bit on an article or get a nap. And so it allowed you to meet one of the desires/needs that you had. So by creating that, what they were doing really was they were facilitating essential needs or desires so that they were no longer as conflicting. They still overlap, but they reduce the overlap. So in churches, we can find innovative ways, creative ways that don't take a lot of time. You don't need a program, where we can help families with people with special needs reduce the incompatibility of their desires. And it could be
that's
bringing a meal or sitting in with someone. I have a group of my students who are really athletic and great guys, and they'll come over and they'll take Jonathan mountain biking or hiking, and while they're doing that, I will go in and I'll work on some of my scholarship that I have to do. So what they're doing is meeting Jonathan's desire for exercise, my desire that Jonathan have exercise and have fun, and then the students are having fun with them as well, and they say, oh, we had a blast too. So that's one way that we reduce the pressures. The frustrations, where you have your desires blocked. And one thing that I would like to say about me as a church member, I love to help people, so I'll get these ideas and let's set up this or that. Well, frustrations are blocked desires. So what I think we need to do is, if we're going to do something and we say we're going to do something, let's make sure we follow through.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get ambitious and say, we're going to set up this event weekly for your child or your family or for elderly adults, and then last minute the person who's running it that week can't come, and so you have to send out a text, or you show up and they say, oh, we had to cancel this week, or it goes for 3 weeks and then we don't have enough resources and it stops.
Yeah.
So let's not do that. Let's not be overly ambitious. Let's set up something we can do and then keep our word, and that will reduce the frustration. Yeah. And then with the pressure, I think one thing we can do is, and they were aware of your schedules. The students didn't say, we can bring you meals at 4, and if you can't be there at 4, then we can't bring you meals, or we can only spend this time with Adam. They found out what time would work for you. So to the best of our ability, and I know we can't just schedule things around one group of people, sure, but we can be somewhat flexible and say, we have a prayer meeting from 6 to 8. Well, if a parent says, boy, I'd love to come to that prayer meeting, but I can't leave until 7:30 when I have my child settled down, then you might say, well, we could move it back a half hour or 45 minutes, and then we'll do it 6:45 to maybe 8:45 or 8:30, and then you could come for half of it. So to the degree we're able, we could be flexible. Also, if you have a Sunday school teacher or a board member, and sometimes I've experienced the other side of the frustration where someone's frustrated with me because I'd made a commitment and then I have an emergency. And I'm not at liberty to tell all the details of the emergency sometimes. It's confidential with our family, and we don't want to talk about our children in certain ways. So if we have an emergency, then you can just say, I believe you. I'm aware of your circumstances. We're going to miss you. We'll make this work, rather than, well, maybe we shouldn't involve you at all, or we really need you. Can't you find somebody else to take care of that? So just being flexible, caring, and understanding is another way you could help at churches. And these 3 things are not hard to do. We can all do them. And all of you, even if you don't have a child with a disability, you've all had moments in time where your life was like that. And all of these things would make our lives easier, and we would be better as a body of Christ. What do you think?
I think that helps me think about how to avoid getting in the position that I was in.
If people were helping you like that, maybe it wouldn't have happened. For me, I have to remember one thing. Apologize early and often. So that's my final words for you. Apologize early. As soon as I'm overtired, don't make excuses. They don't need to know. I'm sorry, I was wrong, I was insensitive. And be sincere when you say that, because sometimes I say it and I'm not sincere. Anyways, apologize early and often. We'll leave it at that.
Indeed.
Okay. That was good.
We're getting there. I mean,
I thought that was solid.
there was no theology